Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. I'm Reed Cowan. President-elect Donald Trump rolling out his latest picks for key cabinet position within his administration. We're talking about 16 names in total that are now added to that list that came together pretty fast, right? So here's the latest. Former Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard picked for Director of National Intelligence. Florida Senator Marco Rubio tapped for Secretary of State, and former Congressman Matt Gaetz getting lots of headlines today, named as Trump's pick to be Attorney General. All of those candidates will now need to be confirmed by the Senate before assuming those positions. That's if senators do not do what the president-elect really wants, and that's the so-called recess confirmations, which would essentially circumvent confirmation hearings and then fast-track these appointments. So the Gaetz nomination sent shockwaves through Congress. You're likely hearing a lot about it. He sits squarely at the center of several investigations into his conduct while serving as a lawmaker. Those accusations include sexual misconduct, drug use, and government obstruction. So Democrats and even a handful of Republicans quickly responded, calling the nomination unserious. Listen.
Presidents are entitled to have the people that they want in these key positions to carry out the mandate that's been delivered to him by the voters of the United States.
It's just kind of like a God tier kind of trolling, just to trigger a meltdown.
I just think it's silly. The president is smart enough and his team is smart enough to know that Mr. Gaetz will never get confirmed by the Senate.
A lot to break down here where Gaetz is concerned. CBS News political reporter Olivia Rinaldi, nice to have you back on CBS News 24/7. It's really clear, especially when you hear Representative Max Miller out of the state of Ohio, a Republican. He's not alone in thinking Gaetz will never get through confirmation. What are you hearing?
Well, Reed, I think shock was the word we heard from Republican sources on Capitol Hill yesterday. I'm not alone with my colleagues of getting that immediate reaction from representatives, but also policy advisors that serve in their offices, that they were really stunned by this pick of Matt Gaetz. Representative Michael Guest, he is the chair of the House Ethics Committee, and he's a Republican, said that he was even surprised, telling reporters yesterday. But as you mentioned, what's important throughout all of this is this has to go through Senate confirmation, and senators are already expressing some doubt that he would be able to be confirmed for Attorney General. Lisa Murkowski, the senior Republican from Alaska, saying that the early picks were surprising, but of Gaetz, she said that some of these picks are what she's calling comfort picks, that Trump is picking people at his comfort level. And it's really up to the Senate to decide whether or not it's their job to confirm his comfort picks or who is really best to serve in those roles. But I do also want to mention of sources I've talked to within Trump's camp, they tell me that this is exactly the type of person that they want. They believe that the people elected Donald Trump to cause disruption in Washington, and certainly a pick like Matt Gaetz, someone who has expressed really doubt about the DOJ and their separation between the Oval Office under President Biden's administration, but also the FBI, really casting doubt on their solidarity of standing alone as the Justice Department, as someone who would disrupt get in office, be completely disruptive of the ongoing investigations and the backgrounds into Donald Trump. So that's really the focus there of the Trump team, telling me that they like this pick, they like that it's causing disruption, and that's their ultimate goal in Washington.
And all eyes on the Senate and whether senators will do those recess appointments, which we understand the president-elect kind of likes the idea of, which would fast-track and circumvent hearings and confirmations, or whether they'll go through the confirmation process. That will be fascinating to see. So let's turn a page a little bit and focus on those campaign trail promises, those disruptive promises. Are these picks really a fulfillment of the president-elect doing what he said he would do, especially on the issues of immigration and mass deportations?
Absolutely. We know that that's his top goal, and you could see that reflected in some of the first names we learned to be his cabinet picks. Tom Homan, the former ICE director, coming back in to serve in that role. Also, Kristi Noem to serve as Department of Homeland Security director. Hearing that those were his top picks and the immediate ones we learned first is kind of indicative of what his goals are. He has always said that day one immigration, shut down the border, enact some executive action policies that would strengthen the U.S. southern border and, tighten the grip on mass deportations across the country. So we're going to see that reflected. Those are some of his promises. He's also promised action as well on inflation, on energy policies. I'm reminded of of something we heard often from him on the campaign trail, which was drill, baby, drill, and frack, frack, frack. Those are some of his key goals, and I'm struck by we haven't learned anything as far as EPA director. That's someone that I'm watching very closely to see who would be the director there, who would be his energy secretary. We've heard a few names as far as that is concerned. So really, we'll start to get a shape of what this administration looks like in the coming days, but I think it's indicative that people have been appointed to Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and to carry out these mass deportations as something that Trump is looking to do on his very first days in office.
CBS News political reporter Olivia Rinaldi, always having to know so much and get it through in so few minutes. Out of the park, Olivia. Nice to have you on CBS News 24/7. The House Ethics Committee faces mounting pressure today to release its report into those sexual misconduct allegations we mentioned earlier. So the group intended to vote on whether to make that report public tomorrow. We're talking about Matt Gaetz. His recent resignation from the House puts that vote into question at this hour. Several Republicans already defending Trump's choice for Attorney General, including Senator Lindsey Graham. Listen.
I think he's very smart. Time will tell.
What would be the implications?
What would be the implications of him on top of Justin?
I think in the liberal world, it will be meltdown. But when you nominate some real liberal person, I vote for him. I'm great. When you nominate somebody like, well, he's not the brother of the president, but he's very close.
Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin called on the Ethics Committee to immediately release all documents included in that Ethics Committee investigation into Mr. Gaetz. In a statement, he said, quote, "The sequence and timing of Mr. Gaetz' resignation from the House raises serious questions about the contents of the House Ethics Committee report." He also had this to say to reporters. Listen.
Make no mistake, this information could be relevant to the question of Mr. Gaetz' confirmation as the next Attorney General of the United States and our constitutional responsibility to advise and consent.
Mr. Chairman, do you think Trump is testing Senate Republicans if they'll buckle and bypass confirmation hearings?
I can't say anything about his motive.
What are the implications of Matt Gaetz being Attorney General?
Well, I want to know what's in this Ethics Committee report. It's a bipartisan investigation of some extremely serious charges. That has to be public. Let the American people then decide whether he's competent.
Perhaps a counterpoint there to what you heard Lindsey Graham saying, that liberals essentially will be in meltdown mode. The senator there saying, look, this was a bipartisan report. So let's bring in Zeke Miller, the chief White House correspondent for the Associated Press. Thank you so much for joining us. So this report getting a lot of questions. Walk us through why the report is seen by so many people as crucial, especially in a bipartisan way.
Well, this is a report that's being generated by a Republican-led House. The Ethics Committee is evenly divided, but Republicans are in charge in the House. They are integral to that investigation and drafting that report. As you saw in that last block, that quote from Congressman Max Miller, a Republican from Ohio, who has sparred with Congressman Gaetz, or now ex-Congressman Gaetz on the House floor for the last several years. There's not a lot of love lost between Matt Gaetz and a lot of his other Republican colleagues. So it's seen across the political spectrum as a fairly objective and thorough and non-politicized investigation into his conduct and whether it violates House rules. And because they don't have jurisdiction anymore, because he resigned, it's likely that may be the end of that investigation. But will a version of that report make its way across the other side of the Capitol to the Senate should these confirmation hearings go forward? That seems to be a very open question. You're even hearing from some Republican lawmakers that would want to see that, because there's also not a love lost between Senate Republicans and somebody like Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, and Zeke, stay with me here because we want to let our viewers hear this, because Gaetz really already handed over his letter of resignation to House leaders just moments ago. That letter was read out loud by the House clerk. We want to share that. We'll get your reaction on the other side. Listen.
I hereby resign as a United States Representative for Florida's 1st Congressional District, effective immediately, and I do not intend to take the oath of office for the same office in the 119th Congress to pursue the position of Attorney General in the Trump administration. Signed sincerely, Matt Gaetz, Member of Congress.
All right, so my question for you is really based on this understanding. If you don't like Matt Gaetz, you say that was strategy. If you do like Matt Gaetz, you say this shows confidence. What is your thought when you hear that letter read?
It's somewhere in between. Certainly, it does help him in terms of potentially putting a block on that potentially damaging the House ethics investigation. It does show confidence that he wants to get that position. And also, House Republicans have a bit of a numbers problem on their hands as President-elect Trump has tapped into their membership and their very thin majority in the next Congress to try to that if they don't get that special election set up soon enough, that Speaker Mike Johnson might have some real problems holding some votes on some of the what they want to be President-elect Trump's agenda right after he takes office. So that sequencing does make sense. At the same time, there are a lot of questions about what is in this report. Will it make its way over to the Senate? Could it still be just as damaging? And given already the attention and the scrutiny that this announced nomination has garnered and generated, there are some serious doubts already in some Republican circles about whether or not this is some sort of ploy to give Gaetz an off-ramp out of Congress before this report comes out, that maybe this nomination actually won't ever make it to the floor and may end up getting pulled in some way, shape, or form. It remains to be seen how that plays out. And a lot of that really will lie in the hands of Senate Republicans. What sort of message are they sending in public and in private to the president-elect?
So let's talk about those Republican circles, because not all are on board with this pick, as we have seen and we're going to see as we get closer to the dinner time headlines. Just moments ago, we heard from Alaska Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski. Let's listen to that.
The early picks, as I have mentioned, some of the early picks, I think were surprising. They were surprising to me. Maybe they're not surprising to many who are very close within the Trump world. They appear to be people that the president-elect knows well, and he is selecting those who he's got a comfort level.
So the senator there talking about early picks, but did that trigger what a lot of people could read as an early indication of resistance from Republicans against Donald Trump's agenda?
She is certainly one of those Republican lawmakers on the bubble. Senate Republicans will have 53 votes. It's certainly a larger majority than they were expecting before Election Day, but still, it's still substantial. One or two dissenters won't be enough to scuttle a nomination like that. But in this case, there certainly could be more. And you're starting to see from Republican lawmakers sort of the distinction of, a president is entitled to selecting their team, but then adding the caveat from a lot of Republicans. But this one is surprising, or this one is a little out there, or some other more colorful words that they may offer in private. And that will be the real test for them. This is Donald Trump's Republican Party. He feels that he's been elected now with a mandate to do what he wants and bring all the disruption that he wants to the nation's capital. Congress is a co-equal branch of government, and they will have to decide to what extent that they want to assert themselves against the president. Oftentimes, you'll see one, maybe several nominations scuttled, even from within of their own party that has vetting issues or something else like that. So it would not be unprecedented at all. In some ways, it would be unprecedented for all of the nominees to sail through without any problems.
Well, Zeke, I want to ask you about something. In the hours, even the days leading up to that secret ballot vote in the Senate to choose the replacement for Senator Mitch McConnell, there were headlines that said that the president-elect really would like to have Rick Scott out of the state of Florida because he could get through more easily his appointments, perhaps even triggering those recess appointments, that mechanism in the Senate. Yesterday, were you taken back by that secret ballot result with Senator Thune chosen? Is that sort of a foot in the door saying, look, we senators, we're going to retain power here and the choice whether to have these confirmation hearings?
It's certainly an indication that they're not, lying down, that they're maintaining the will to put their foot down when they choose. The question is, how often are they willing to do that? That's sort of the question. Had it been somebody like Rick Scott as majority leader, he would have never challenged likely President-elect Trump. He'd made that clear. That was essentially his campaign platform. Now there's a chance. It doesn't mean that there's a certainty one way or the other.
It certainly means we'll be watching. Zeke Miller, Chief White House Correspondent, thank you so much. It's nice to talk to you today on CBS News 24/7. Man, it's like watching sports, only it's politics. President Joe Biden in Peru for what will be his last meeting as President of the United States with China's president. Can headway really be made in an increasingly chilly U.S.-China environment when there's a whole new round of leaders? And you're just seeing this. We're talking about it coming in very soon to United States leadership. We'll ask that question straight ahead. Breaking news, CBS News 24/7. When we see it, you see it. And right now, you are seeing the best of America. These are first responders. Louisville, Kentucky, in the Phoenix Hill neighborhood, in the wake of a building collapse. You can see all attention and all eyes focused right there on what is a rescue operation going on. We understand one worker is trapped right there. So you can see what is the effort on the right side of your screen with that hydraulic machine to push back the wall of rubble there to try to create an opening where those rescuers can get down and get that person out. There is some good news here to report, and that is this, directly from those who are so close to this breaking news scene. They are saying that the person who is trapped is able to communicate with those first responders. That is always a good sign there. So you can see all of the energy, all of the tools, and all of the resources possible to get that person out. Once again, Louisville, Kentucky, in the Phoenix Hill neighborhood, a building collapsed, and now first responders kneeling at the edge of a hole there to claim life out of that dark hole. We'll be watching this one throughout our broadcast. We hope to bring you a success story. It looks and sounds like we just might be able to bring that to you a little bit later on CBS News 24/7. All right, President Biden's final moment on the world stage will come with a face-to-face meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. They're at a summit in Peru. The two world leaders expected to hold talks spanning a number of global issues, most notable, of course. We talk about this a lot here on the broadcast, the heightened tensions between Washington and Beijing. CBS News White House correspondent Natalie Brand traveled to Peru, where the president will be later today. Natalie, good to see you. What can we expect from this trip?
Good to join you, Reed. Well, this will be President Biden's third meeting with President Xi since he took office. The last one, of course, as you probably remember, was in Woodside, California. And the White House maintains that a really important way to continue to manage this very complicated but consequential relationship is for the leaders to talk face to face, this leader to leader dialogue. And they really hope to kind of reflect upon some of the achievements or progress made over the last year since that Woodside summit, namely resuming military to military communication, which had kind of frozen as tensions were really ratcheted up leading up to that meeting last year. That's the ability for our top military leaders to pick up the phone and reach someone in China to really try to communicate and avoid any sort of miscalculation, ultimately avoid conflict here. They'll also talk about some of the other big issues that were discussed back then. That includes fentanyl, that includes AI, and the White House says President Biden expected to express his concern over the PRC's support of Russia in its war against Ukraine. That's obviously a big topic of concern for President Biden. But really, at the end of the day, it's trying to talk about this upcoming transition and ensure that the lines of communication remain open, Reed.
Those were the big headlines for sure to come out of that California meeting. I have to ask, though, and I think a lot of people would ask the very same question, with President Joe Biden leaving the White House and now President-elect Donald Trump coming into the White House, will what happens today really hold any value considering the transition?
I mean, that's a big question that we will have to wait and see as time goes on and really try to see how the new administration, the incoming administration, President-elect Trump's approach to China, how it is different than that of President Biden. But again, overall, the current sitting president of the United States, one of his big focuses during his time in office has been the Indo-Pacific, trying to build up alliances and also, manage competition and avoid conflict with China. So I think he's going to try to cement some of his foreign policy goals in that department, and again talk about, the basic message from the United States will carry on into the next administration, even if certain aspects of it or policy might.
All right, Natalie, a final question. We know that you are in Peru, but you have the power and the reach of the CBS News family. We're dying to know, have you heard anything about what happened in that closed-door meeting between the president-elect and President Joe Biden before he got on Air Force One and headed to Peru?
Yeah, well, Reed, we know it was around 2 hours long, and the White House describes it as substantive. We know that domestic policy was discussed, obviously foreign policy as well. And while we don't have too many details, President Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, did make clear that President Biden expressed standing with Ukraine, again, another key focus for the current administration, is in the national security interest of the United States, as well as, of course, pushing back against Russia. There's obviously a lot of concern and question there about what the new administration's approach will be when it comes to Ukraine, and whether, aid, security assistance might be cut or changed, as President-elect Trump and some Republicans have expressed in the past. So we do know we got that tiny readout on that area. And, it's also interesting, the National Security Advisor was asked, what are some of the most pressing issues that the next administration will face? What would he tell his successor? And he said, long term, this relationship with China will be one of the defining issues in the coming years. Of course, most immediately, it is Iran and its proxies, Russia, of course, and North Korea. Reed.
Natalie Brand, live for us. Thank you so much. As always, so great to see you, my friend. Video to our monitors out of Spain shows another round of severe floods battling the Spanish coastline. This is in Malaga. It's about 400 miles down the coast from Valencia, where historic floods killed more than 200 2 weeks ago. Thousands evacuated this area as downpours really dumped a month's worth of rainfall in just 1 hour. In Valencia, the colossal cleanup effort now on pause as communities there also brace for more rain. And one of our dear friends in our family is Pilar from that very area. She would smack me for saying Valencia. It's to her Valencia, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. And our thoughts with so many people who've lost so much. Really, that is what causes it, right? When they get that much rain in this amount of time.
Oh my gosh, to say a month's worth of rain within an hour? Crazy amounts of rain, not only there, but we're also starting to see that down into the Yucatan Peninsula too, as we are still in hurricane season right now. Now, there's been a big development. Tropical Depression 19 has just been upgraded to Tropical Storm Sarah. It's now a named storm just south of Mexico, near the Yucatan Peninsula right now. It's hard to tell right here, but that cluster of clouds over Mexico as the sun starts to rise into the early morning hours today, afternoon hours today, we're going to continue to watch this develop. This system right here is starting to gain strength at 35 miles per hour just about an hour ago, now about 45 miles per hour, and it's continuing to sit just offshore of Honduras, Mexico, and south of Cuba right now. We continue to keep a close eye on this because Cuba just dealt with devastation recently, with millions of people going without power for weeks from the last storm that just swept throughout that region. Now let's talk about Tropical Storm Sarah, now at 40 miles per hour. Slowly but surely moving to the west around 12 miles per hour. As it starts to move its way inland, it's going to sit here heading into this weekend's forecast, producing a lot of rain that's consistent for this region. About 10 to 20 inches expected in Honduras alone just into this weekend and early next week. So tropical storm warnings and advisories have been issued throughout that region, but I think it's worth noting that even though it's still far out, heading into early next week, our spaghetti models are showing a chance of it entering the Gulf of Mexico. If that's the case, it will hit warm warmer sea surface temperatures. And we are still in hurricane season right now until the end of this month on the 30th. And as we keep a close eye on some of these models, there is a chance it could re-enter that surface or the sea surface temperatures over into the Gulf and potentially move its way closer to America. So that's the big question right now. Where is it going? How much stronger will it get? And we will continue to keep a very close eye on that heading into this weekend.
We need it. Thanks, Jess. Watching your wallet, what exactly is a producer price index? And if you're not a producer, why should you care? Kelly O'Grady with how this matters a great deal to what you pay when you pull out your wallet to buy something. Stay with us. Welcome back. How's this for a news talker? Reports of unidentified flying objects, UFOs, reportedly over U.S. airspace. 21 such reports. And here's your headline. They are unresolved and fairly close together at that. Between May of last year and June of this year, look, you're looking at the video of these. An office within the Department of Defense that investigates so-called UFOs says it received 757 reports in that very short period of time. Some of those identified as balloons or birds or drones, but those 21 we're talking about, the office continues to investigate. That looks like a blimp, but then it just changed shape, so that's weird. The director of the office said none of those reports are tied to foreign entities, tech, or extraterrestrial life, but I'm watching, and we're certainly talking about it. Hey, we've got fresh new economic data that will directly impact your wallet. The prices that companies pay before selling items to you are coming in a little bit hotter than expected at the 2.4% rate from last year. So that's up from the 1.8% that we saw last month for wholesale goods, as they're called. So what does it mean? Well, you strip away prices for food and energy, and that number jumps even higher to 3.5%. And it's well above that 2% target set for us by the feds. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady breaks it all down for us as people already complain about what they pay retailers. Kelly, so if retailers are paying more, does that mean we all pay more?
Well, Reed, it would track that way. And most often producers, companies, they will pass the price down to us consumers. And that's what really spurs consumer inflation. And of course, we got those numbers yesterday. Now, what's interesting here is, the producer prices, those are the bellwether. And so if those go up, likely inflation is going to go up. And so this is something that the Fed is looking at. We just got the numbers yesterday on consumer inflation. Today, producer inflation is up. I don't want folks to panic yet. We're just starting to see this tick up. It's not a trend yet, but this is certainly not what we want to see heading into a potential rate cut in December, Reed.
Right. Okay. So from the Get to Know You file, Kelly, I'm going to tell you a little secret of mine. I'm one of the millions of Americans who at lunchtime goes on Zillow and just goes on a mental vacation to look at housing prices, which leads me to my question about mortgages. You have some news about mortgage rates in the United States?
I do, and I will admit, Reed, I also do that. I have a whole list of houses I can't afford. It's great. But the slightest of good news is that mortgage rates, they just broke this hour. For the 30-year fixed, it actually ticked down slightly. So last week it was at 6.79%. Now it's at 6.78%, so 0.01% down. But listen, every little bit helps, and this is a good trend, or rather, it's a good step, because the trend, the last 6 weeks, they had consistently been going up, and there was a lot of confusion of, well, hey, interest rates are going down from the Federal Reserve. Why are mortgage rates not tracking? Mortgage rates actually track where investors think inflation and rates are going. That's tied to the 10-year Treasury. So the fact that we saw this tick down a little bit, I mean, it's good for folks who are looking to purchase that first home, maybe refinance the bellwether that maybe this is coming down, but don't celebrate too much yet because, of course, that is very, very minor, Reed.
Okay, that is a tiny tick down. That sort of feels like a toothbrush in your Halloween candy. Gee, thanks. Okay, we'll keep watching that. So because of all of these headlines, we all want to hear from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell speaking very soon. What can he say to Americans who are watching their wallets?
Yeah, I mean, I actually asked him that question last week at the Federal Reserve. I said, look, you're telling me the economy is good. Businesses are saying the economy is good. When are Americans going to feel it? And he said, look, I hear you. It's going to take time. And I think we're going to hear that same message today, that it's more of a wait and see economy, because you are getting these inflation readings that seem a little bit higher. There are going to be multiple more data points that they're going to consider that will come out before that next reading. But Reed, I always like to watch the Dow when he speaks, because sometimes it goes up and sometimes it goes down, because investors, consumers, everyone is really looking at that as this is going to, change things very meaningfully, whether you're a consumer or you're a company.
This, I ask you, how many people can just casually drop, hey, I just asked the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell XYZ question last week? Only Kelly O'Grady. All right, we also understand you have good news from the House of the Mouse, so to speak. What's the dish on Disney, my friend?
So Disney, if you're watching the stock, it's up over 6% today, and that's because they released their quarterly earnings. So that's basically the financial picture for the company from the last 3 months. And it's good news, finally. The films, Inside Out 2, broke records, the best animated film of all time in terms of box office growth. They're looking at their slate going forward. They're saying, we think that we've turned it around. We're actually going to have hits instead of flops, and then streaming as well. They have profitability. They're projecting growth over the next 3 years, especially when you see media companies kind of mired in turmoil as they figure out this new streaming world. This was very good news from Disney. And Reed, this is something that I was surprised at. Consumers are still going to the parks and they're spending even more than they did. Hopefully they're not putting it on their credit cards and their credit card debt racking up. But that's also something to kind of see and say, oh, wow, people are still spending on things that are wants, not needs.
Yes, they are. Well, Mickey will not be sleeping on the couch, and Goofy's no longer in the doghouse over at Disney. Kelly O'Grady, it's always great to talk to you. You have a great day there. When we continue on CBS News 24/7, shockwaves from some of President-elect Donald Trump's appointments. You've heard the name Matt Gaetz. You've seen it on your social media feed the last 24 hours. Why some are cheering this as a disruption wanted by the incoming president. We'll break it down when we come back. We continue to watch here on CBS News 24/7 this breaking news playing out. Louisville, Kentucky, Phoenix Hill neighborhood. A building collapsed and one person is trapped. You are seeing first responders there, all of their attention around what is sort of a hole or a crevasse there where that building collapsed. On the right side, you see the hydraulics there. They are pushing a piece of wood up against the rubble. That's to keep it from collapsing down on the person that they are trying to rescue. We just heard a moment ago that they have medics also coming there to help this person. And we have the opportunity to listen in on an update that was given just a second ago from one of the first responders. Let's listen in.
Right now, there's one individual who is currently being rescued. It's going to take a while. But here to give a briefing on what occurred and what's taking place right now is Louisville Fire Chief Brian O'Neill.
So here's what we have so far. We have there were about 6 workers that were on site working on demolition. One of those workers at about 11:40 fell into a void space, and when they fell, a lot of rubble and debris came down on top of them and they were pinned. Immediately, they ceased operations. Called 911. We received the call. It was dispatched, and we had companies on scene within 3 minutes. As soon as we got on scene, we set up. We realized what we're dealing with is what we would call confined space rescue or trench rescue. A little bit different than structural collapse because nothing fell. This is something that a person fell into. We have all the experts that do this on a regular basis, train on this type of thing. So they set up. The individual that's in there is talking to us. He is Spanish speaking only, but Captain Ramirez from Rescue 11 Quint 7 is bilingual and is speaking to him right now. They have got, this is a very, very slow process. So you need to understand this might take another hour or 3 to gradually, because every time you shift anything, that can cause other things to happen within all that debris pile that they're moving to get to this person. Louisville EMS is on site working with us as well. They are going to provide a paramedic once we clear enough debris around his chest and arms so that we can start providing medical care, oxygen, intravenous fluids if we need. That'll happen. So we will we'll put a harness on that medic and get them to him as soon as there's enough space to do so. We have multiple firefighters, about 5 different companies that are on scene. Reason being, if you're thinking it's one person, one area, we have to constantly move people in and out to make sure that we've got fresh bodies, fresh hands working on this incident. Again, let's see if make sure I get on my notes here. I think that's it. If there are any questions, yeah, this is a contractor. These aren't city employees. This is a contractor. As I mentioned, there were about 6 workers that were working on site. But again, they ceased operations as soon as this happened, called us immediately. We got here in about 3 minutes. So we do not know the extent of the injuries, but again, we are at least able to communicate a little bit with him, but he is pinned. It is a precarious situation.
How far down?
So from where he was, he went down about maybe 10, 12 feet. But we're to him right now. We're clearing things around him, talking to him.
On that update to a rescue that is happening right now in Louisville, Kentucky, in that Phoenix Hill neighborhood after a building collapse. If the gentleman standing to the left of that first responder looks familiar to you, that is Mayor Craig Greenberg of Louisville, Kentucky. You saw him right here on CBS News 24/7 just 48 hours ago because of the explosion that happened at a plant there that killed 2 people in Louisville, Kentucky. These situations not connected, but really draws a line and it punctuates the fact that first responders have to be trained, and they have had a very busy week in Louisville, Kentucky. The good news here, it looks like the person who's trapped there in the Phoenix Hill neighborhood will get out and get out alive. But when we come back, we're going to be talking about President-elect Donald Trump's vision for his second term in office becoming cleared this week. His list of intended nominations for cabinet positions got 3 additions. Florida Senator Marco Rubio tapped Secretary of State, former Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. She's been picked by the president-elect for Director of National Intelligence. Former Congressman Matt Gaetz, and he's the one getting all the headlines today, picked by the president-elect to be Attorney General. So let's drill down on Matt Gaetz. He's dominating headlines today. There he is in the past. His nomination really stunned lawmakers in both chambers. He currently sits in the hot seat for ongoing investigations into allegations of sexual misconduct and alleged government obstruction. So his ideas for the Justice Department raises a lot of alarms on both sides of the aisle. Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal warned what he thinks is ahead on Capitol Hill. Listen.
Matt Gaetz's nomination alone is likely to bring chaos to the Department of Justice because it will prompt major resignations among the professionals who have no intention of serving with an attorney general interested in pyrotechnics and acting rather than real law enforcement.
CBS News political reporter Hunter Woodall joins us now for more. Hunter, what other obstacles lay ahead for Mr. Gaetz in his path to get confirmed by the Senate?
You can't talk enough about how difficult of a path former Representative Gaetz has to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Now, this is going to be a Republican-controlled Senate, but I was in the Senate, basement when this this pick was announced. It was difficult to comprehend for Republicans. There was not a lot of good messaging about this. There was not a clear sense of what support he would have. Again, this is a Republican Senate, and it's no slam dunk that he will be confirmed given all the concerns that you talked about above, about his background and his, the allegations about him.
Do you think we'll get a sense of what is in a report that was not released that now many lawmakers are calling for release so the American people can see what the people in the halls of Congress are talking about?
It's hard to say, but I would just point to what so many of the former congressman's colleagues have been saying about him. You've seen scorn for him from both Democrats, but also Republicans who've served with him. Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who obviously Matt Gaetz led the effort to remove him as Speaker a few years back. There's a lot of acrimony in the Republican Party about Matt Gaetz, about how he's acted, even publicly. So I think when you look at this nomination and all the nominations that President-elect Trump has talked about so far, this is the most difficult one by far and likely one of the heavier lifts for Senate Republicans.
And I also want to ask about this. I don't think we can ask this question enough. Happening at the same time, President-elect Trump calling for recess appointments to get all of these nominations fast-tracked for his first day in office. Do you think that the choice of Mr. Gaetz might cause people to say, look, we're going to go ahead with Senate confirmations for all of them?
It's a great question. And again, recess appointments, this is an ability that any president has, that President-elect Donald Trump will have. The question is whether or not the Senate Republicans will let him actually use it, because so often the Senate goes into what's called pro forma sessions to prevent recesses long enough for a president to make recess appointments. This has been happening, my colleagues have reported, for around a decade to prevent recess appointments from happening. So if Donald Trump wants to do this, especially for his more controversial picks for his own cabinet, he's going to need a lot of buy-in from Senate Republicans. It's not clear that Senate Republicans, as they have this new majority, that they're going to want to cede this kind of power to President-elect Trump, even though the size of his victory and power within the party is at an all-time high right now, it appears.
Yeah, our teams also got to hear this from Senator Josh Hawley, a firebrand in his own right. We want to ask you about this on the other side, but let's go ahead and play that for our viewers.
Do you have any concerns about recess appointments, though? It sounds like you don't.
No, it's totally constitutional.
Have you spoken to anyone connected to Mar-a-Lago about the nomination yet?
About which one?
The Gaetz nomination.
Well, you said connected to Mar-a-Lago, like the president?
Yeah, like the transition.
I have not.
All right, so you hear Senator Hawley there say, yes, it's totally constitutional. If it's constitutional, why then for years and years have we seen the confirmation process play out?
Well, so much of this, obviously has come from that political back and forth of, when President Barack Obama was in office, Republicans did not want to keep ceding that recess appointment power to him. And it's really just become the norm since then. And for, I point back to, this is a Senate GOP that is more, Trump favorable in nature, but there are still several Republicans in the Senate who actually voted to find Trump guilty after the January 6th Capitol attack in the impeachment trial against him. So this is a GOP that has some differences, and when you look at that reception, not just to former Congressman Gaetz' nomination, but also that of Tulsi Gabbard, this is a difficult topic that Republicans are going to face.
All right, thank you so much for talking to us, Hunter Woodall, CBS News political reporter. Great to have you here today. When we come back, our eyes are on the state of Idaho. Arguably, some of the most strict abortion laws in the United States are in Idaho. A lawsuit brought by women for women. And word from doctors saying they risk prison time if they provide care. We'll break down those arguments live from Idaho when we come back. All right, this making headlines. Lawyers representing former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani now trying to withdraw from his defamation case brought forth by those two Georgia election workers. They point to ethics rules that protect lawyers from working for a client whom they have fundamental disagreements with. So let's give you some background here. Mr. Giuliani owes $150 million to the two women he said tampered with the 2020 election. Today's the deadline. A federal judge gave Mr. Giuliani to hand over valuable property as part of that deal. Attorneys for the women accused the former New York mayor of hiding and moving assets. Moving over to Boise, Idaho, where the trial over a near-total state abortion ban is back in session. Doctors on the stand testifying Idaho's strict abortion laws are confusing and stop them from providing necessary medical care, causing them to face license revocation, fines, or even possible prison time. That lawsuit brought by women for women, many personal stories offered there on the stand in the courtroom as women line up to tell their stories. Well, we now know the fate of Alex Jones' Infowars publication. Chances are, if you like satire, you've heard of The Onion. Well, guess what? The Onion, the new owners of Infowars. So this is news for many reasons, but mainly because families of victims of the horrific Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting massacre back the purchase. Jones owes more than $1 billion in damages to those families for calling the mass shooting that took their children's lives a hoax. The family said the purchase will put an end to what they call Alex Jones's misinformation machine. We want to take you live to Louisville, Kentucky as we leave you on CBS News 24/7. Just one more peek at that rescue attempt happening. First responders trying to pluck a life out of a hole after a building collapse. Much more on this and other breaking news from around the nation on CBS News 24/7. Thanks for watching.